I could have gone the other way. The other way was the right way. It's fine. That's the way we do things. How many of you went to Berkeley? Just try that. So my parents met at Berkeley. My brother's named after the Lawrence Hall of Science. So I used to joke that my parents must have had a good time there. But anytime I come back to the Bay, it feels like a bit of a homecoming. My brother was born here, and my big presidential rally, the first of its kind, was right not that far from here. How many of you all attended a Yang Gang rally in 2020? No, where were you? Now, some of you are from other countries. It's cool. Would have been tough for you to come. So when I ran for president on the idea of universal basic income, one of the first communities that saw the vision was the crypto community. And when I spoke at Consensus and Blockchain for Good and other events, I understood why, because this community is literally building the future, and it's filled with a sense of abundance and optimism and possibility. How many of you felt that energy over the last number of hours? Optimism, abundance, possibility, right? So unfortunately, that energy isn't shared by everyone, either here in the US or around the world. And I was just speaking to some of the executives at Xerox Labs, and they're genuinely motivated by a desire to improve people's lives. In other parts of the country, they think that the technologies you all are working on might be able to alleviate poverty, which is my mission in life. Also might be able to give us control of our own data. Might be able to disintermediate some giant behemoth tech companies from controlling many aspects of our waking lives. Hopefully some of you are working on, how many are working on something that's related to something I just said? Financial inclusion, right? So this is the future that needs to be built as quickly as possible. And when I was running for president, the folks that rallied to a vision of UBI and the Yang Gang, it was certainly the crypto community, was a lot of technologists, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of innovators, because we understand that things are going to look differently in the future, and we want that to be a good future and not like the negative version of the future that unfortunately is becoming more and more of a potential choice for more and more people. Not the folks that frankly end up coming to events like this one, but we have to be able to take this vision and make it relevant for more people as quickly as we can. Not everyone's going to be able to come to an event like this. Not everyone is literally engaged in trying to actualize a better version of the future. So when I ran, we raised $40 million. I made 7 presidential debates. You all tune into any of those debates? That was good fun. I'll tell you a story. My parents were not very excited about my running for president. They are Asian after all. They were like, but then after the 7th debate, I got a call, and my dad went to a viewing party in Taiwan of the debate, because it turns out that I was a bit of a folk hero in Taiwan. And so he went to watch this debate, and then he raised his hand and said, "That's my son." And then everyone started cheering for him and then bought him drinks. And so I was in Iowa and I got this story, and I was like, wow, it was all worth it. Dad ended up proud. But as we made progress through those debates, and people started thinking about what we could do maybe to solve some of the biggest problems, the world changed in 2020, COVID. It became a very hard time for many Asian Americans here in the US in terms of this new sense of hostility and xenophobia. And so I started to dig in even further and say, okay, I ran for president and overachieved by most measurements. Most people didn't expect me to advance quite that far. If you are Asian here, and I sense that some of you are Asian, when you first found out about, I sense it. When you first heard about my presidential campaign, you thought like, oh, like I hope he's good, like I hope the Asian guy running for president is good. And I still was filled with this despondence, this anxiety about the direction of American politics, even after we'd achieved a remarkable amount. And now, next Tuesday, we're going to be experiencing these midterms that, again, are going to be something of a fork in the road between an atmosphere of, let's say, scarcity and abundance, or pessimism and optimism, or nativism and openness. How many of you all are Americans? Let's raise your hand on that. Keep your hand up if you either have voted or plan to vote. Right, you should at least pretend on that. Good now. Everyone's hand stayed up, which is beautiful. Like, I voted as well. If you do vote in a place like California, that's great. Like, we all have to do our part. But one of the major issues now is that if you look around the country, this country is becoming very blue in some places and very red in other places. And so even as you end up running up the votes in particular parts of the country, it may or may not have an impact on the trajectory of our national politics. So I started digging into the numbers. What do you all think the approval rate is of U.S. Congress right now? I'm anchoring you low, so you know it's pretty low. Like, what do you think that number is? 20 to 28%. So it's, let's say 25% would be accurate. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? Anchoring you high. Go ahead, shout out some numbers. 80 sounds high, it's 94%, which is a better win rate than the Kevin Durant era Golden State Warriors. So I want you to imagine if you're running a business, you're an entrepreneur, you're an operator, let's say that 3 out of 4 of your customers were unhappy and nothing ever changed. That is the situation in American politics right now. That's why people feel so locked out on the outside looking in. You're like, wait a minute, like 3 out of 4 of us aren't happy, but like nothing will change. And if you want to dig into why that re-election rate is so high relative to the satisfaction rate, it's because 90% of the districts in this country are either blue or red at this point, where there's no uncertainty as to whether the Democrat or the Republican is going to win. So even as I'm saying, hey, everyone vote, you should know that right now your vote's getting funneled into one of two camps, and there's no uncertainty as to whether a Democrat or Republican is going to win in 90% of these races. So how can they lose their jobs? The only way they can lose their jobs is if they get primaried from within their party, right? Because if it gets to the general, you know what side's going to win. So then the incentives for that individual legislator is just to avoid getting primaried, which means that they are very much enthralled to the most extreme 10% of the electorate, generally in one primary or the other. Now, you might be a Democrat, Republican, or independent, or not care about American politics, but you should know that like 10% of the population controlling your politics is not a good idea. And the 10% are not what you'd call the most reasonable of people in a lot of these areas. If you track down the 10% most extreme partisans on one side or the other. So that's why American politics feels so messed up, so broken, is because it's going through the worst design flaw in the history of the world. It was designed that worked sort of okay for a particular period of time, but now it's breaking down, it's disintegrating. And what's needed is a group of people to try and build a better vision of the future, which is what drove you all here today to build a better version of the internet, build a set of tools that might be able to help include millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people in the financial services of the future, be able to give people control of their own data, their own destiny, the things that they're exposed to. Right now, our data is getting sold and resold for over $200 billion a year, and that's benefiting a small handful of firms and individuals, but it's not benefiting us. No, like one of the things I was saying on the presidential trail was how many of you got your data check in the mail of that $200 billion? You all are actually making it so people might get a data check. You know what I mean? Like the things I was saying on the presidential trail, you all are building in real life. It's why I'm so thrilled for the potential of Web3, where if my goal is to alleviate poverty, which it is, there are only 2 ways that that's going to happen. I pursued road number 1, which is get control of the federal government and alleviate poverty en masse. And I will say that the support for universal basic income now in the US was measured at something like 65%. When I was running for president, it was 27%. So it went up a lot over the last number of months. And those of you who supported my campaign, thank you, because you helped make that happen. And if you didn't, screw you. No, I'm kidding. But so that's path number 1 is political reform, government actually listening to its people. Because the biggest disconnect right now is that the American government does not actually have to listen to the average human. And that's manifesting in different ways. You keep being told, you know the problem, those other people over there are like, no, it's actually a design problem, it's a system problem. So that's path number 1. But then path number 2 is Web3. You know, that there is a possibility to create new ways of exchanging value, of giving people control of their own information, of a next generation of services that's truly ground up instead of top down, is grassroots driven, and includes people in on the deal. I hope that's what animates you all. Is that like a relatively reasonable approximation of the mission? So that's why I'm thrilled to be here with you all today to help encourage you to help build this version of the future, because people need it. People who have no idea what Web3 or blockchain are, what they could mean to us, either in terms of democracy or otherwise, need us to actually get to a point where it's relevant to them, where it's actually making an impact on their lives. And if we can do that, then we have a chance to truly improve the human condition and put the entire planet on a course for a future we'll actually be proud of. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Yeah, with Amir, come on up. I guess I'll come take a seat.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to chat with you. I think everyone knows Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate. I think what's less known is your origin stories in Web3. Always love hearing more about people's origin stories. Curious, like, how you first heard about this technology and like what ultimately took you down the rabbit hole.
All right, so I have a lot of friends in tech, and some of them were talking to me about Bitcoin pretty early on, like, let's call it 2016 or so, something along those lines. Now, I want to say very, very clearly that I was not one of those dudes who then ran out and bought a bunch, and now I'm like, like I was not one of those dudes. I was like, they're telling me about this, and I was like, oh, interesting. And I even had this inkling then that I was going to end up being supportive of these technologies and innovations, and I didn't want it to be self-interested. So I said, like, I'm not going to buy it and then be like talking my own book. But I became aware of it in 2016 or so, and then 2018 in earnest when I was running for president, there was like this click where it's like, oh, these people are all about trying to create a future of abundance, and that's what my campaign's about. And so we ended up being really hand in glove. And then after my presidential campaign, I doubled back and realized that there are all these problems that we can solve with these tools, including potentially, I didn't talk about this in my remarks, but potentially making democracy work better, because democracy is a bit of a mess. And one of the visions that I'm going to suggest most of you would be excited about is how many of you would like to be able to vote on your smartphone on the blockchain? Raise your hand to that. Now, if we were to go to the current elected officials and say, hey guys, like, vote on your smartphone securely in the blockchain, like, tamper-proof, no problem, what would they say? They would say, of course not, and it's because it's insecure, and the technology is untested and hackable. And then if you produced a dozen white papers saying it's actually fine and secure and tamper-proof, what would they say to that? Don't care. Like, I don't care about your that, because the truth is that the existing players don't genuinely have an interest in making it easier for people to vote or to interact with the systems in a new way that makes sense for you. They just want things to be predictable and certain and gameable for them, because they have massive investments in the current process. So it's one of the major opportunities, because you're seeing this democratic system falter, disintegrate really, but you're also seeing more and more average Americans saying, yo, whatever you're selling is not working. Like, I don't believe anymore. Example, the two most likely candidates in the presidential this cycle will be Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Combined age in 2024, 159. It's just math. And 58% of Americans don't want either of those guys. It really will be ridiculous. Where you're like, wait a minute, in a country of 300 million people, like, it's these two dudes again? Like, they didn't get better in the last 4 years. Like, they've just gotten older and crazier in one case. So literally tens of millions of Americans are going to be looking around saying, like, hey, do I have any other choices? And if you wanted to, you could create another choice where people can vote on their smartphones. And this is the kicker. This is the thing that no one realizes. You could have a political party where everyone's voting on their smartphones for that nominee because a political party controls its own nomination process and can do whatever it wants. Like that, there is no need to, like there are no rules and regs around it. so imagine that kind of leapfrogging of the legacy parties. Like that's the kind of thing that is on the table in this next number of cycles.
So what do you think actually needs to change? Like, or like how can we actually get to the point where like politicians are willing to accept new technology and like change the political system? It seems like the incentives right now are pretty awful.
Yeah, the incentives don't cut in the right way. So I think it's going to happen the old-fashioned American way, which is they'll be forced to kicking and screaming. I mean, like the American political system wants to preserve itself, and so you'll wind up changing things slowly, and then very, very quickly, is my guess. Which, by the way, is the way it happens in most other contexts, right? Where if you look at a particular mature industry, they'll be like, oh, it's not going to change, not going to change, not going to change. And all of a sudden, like, you know, all of a sudden, Uber's everywhere, or whatever the example is. So I think that's going to be the pattern in the American political system. Just the question is, when does that exponential growth curve hit? And I will say that, because I do this all day, one of the major variables of when that curve hits is going to be whether there are particular individuals that decide to stand up and say, okay, like I don't believe in either of these options, like I'm going to be like the alternative option, and have that person be someone that will have like the popular appeal and recognition and the heft and the gravitas and the resources where everyone will immediately say, okay, like I need to take this very seriously.
So you talked a little bit about voting on the blockchain and how that could be used to improve our system, but I know you're also interested in DAOs. Curious if you think they have any place in our system, maybe not yet, but call it 10 years from now.
So if you think about our representative democracy, the major problems are the incentives don't work. But the other problems are that the frequency is both too long and too short. It's too short because someone's always running for office and raising money, but it's too long because, let's say I want to tell you right now what I think, like you don't have to listen to me. So if you had a DAO or liquid democracy or something where you can vote in real time and say, hey, here's what I want you to do, that could be extraordinarily powerful. Now, right now, and Amir, the subtext of your question recognizes this, right now I liken DAOs to those college projects that we all did, where certain people did the work and other people didn't. You know what I mean? There's like that free rider dynamic that goes on, and so, oh yeah, like you all worked hard in your college projects, you know, fuck you. Anyway.
As someone in a couple DAOs, I can concur with that.
Me too, man, me too. Obviously, I mean, you can see in the bio, it's like, you know, I started a couple DAOs, and so what happens in these DAOs is that a handful of people do a lot of the work and take a lot of the responsibility, and in my opinion, really should be given much more decision-making because they're doing the work. And then there are other people that are checked out, and then maybe occasionally will pipe in and be like, wait, well, what's happening? and that's the current dynamic. But there are ways that you can institutionalize that dynamic and make it perfectly fine to have the right incentives for public officials. So the example would be, let's say I'm a parent, which I am, and a bunch of other things, and there are public officials who want to know what I think about the school system or public safety or whatever it is. Like, we can form collectives ourselves, and like I can anoint a proxy who I trust to say, look, like you can vote for me in terms of what I think about the school issues, and I trust this other person to vote on these other issues. And so you can wind up with this really cool web of activated people who we trust, who are actually able to be our interfaces with the folks who are going to pull the levers of policy. They're doing a version of this in Taiwan, which is like something of an innovator in terms of using technology to energize their democracy. In America, technology is not energizing our democracy. What's it doing? it's splintering our consciousness into a bunch of mini silos and making it so that no one can actually agree on facts or the truth.
Cool. Well, you mentioned that you are also involved in a couple DAOs. You actually founded 2 DAOs, which is more than probably most people in this world. Can you talk a little bit about those, both Lobby3 and Golden DAO?
Sure, and I just want to say thank you to Xerox Labs and Amir and others, but mainly you guys in this context, for supporting Lobby3, which is an effort to try and have sensible regulations enacted in DC that are mindful of the people, the interests, and the sophistication of these tools so that these technologies aren't politicized. Because what percentage of things get politicized in American life nowadays? Like 98, 99? And if Web3 gets politicized, it's probably bad because you'll wind up with like this pendulum swinging and like this kind of ideological approach to it. So Lobby3 is an attempt to open that up, make it truly nonpartisan or bipartisan, and we have some massive successes that I can share. The first is that the American Conference of Mayors came out and endorsed the blockchain. So if you go to any congressional district now, there's a mayor in that district that has raised their hand and says, like, I like these technologies and they're good for my community. The Bipartisan Policy Center has been running, this might be boring to you guys, I don't know, but this is what we do at Lobby3. Sorry, what can I say? We're actually doing work. So the Bipartisan Policy Center in DC is running educational events for congressional staffers. So the average senator is 64, the average member of Congress is 59. They're not showing up to this training. but they could send their policy staffer, they can send their young, and if you look at a congressional office, what happens is they look around and say, hey, which of you wants to be the blockchain person? And who raises their hand? Like, well, you all raise your hand, I appreciate that. But like the kind of young whippersnapper, tech-savvy person in that office raise their hand, and so they end up coming to this Bipartisan Policy Center orientation. They report back. The Aspen Institute is now going to be writing a white paper. So these are the things that Lobby3 does to try and depoliticize these tools and make it so that the innovation doesn't get pushed overseas. Really grateful to you and Xerox Labs for helping make that possible. Golden DAO is a community for Asian American activists, creators, entrepreneurs, and builders. It doesn't even need to be American, just say Asian, because we realized that there was no affinity group for Asian American creatives in Web3, and so we thought we'd build it. So we have events and a treasury, and we try and support people doing wholesome things. It was created in part as a response to the anti-Asian hate. So hopefully those two sound like very benign, benevolent efforts.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a few other organizations pretty active in Washington, Blockchain Association, Coin Center. How do you view Lobby3 as different from these? Where's the focus?
We work nicely with all those people. So there are industry groups, and some of them are tied to various companies and their platforms. Like blockchain's a bit more agnostic. But we're complementary, and the community's not that big. So one of the things that we found too is that different members of Congress and different regulators have different levels of receptivity to different messengers. So let's say I'm a member of Congress in Missouri. If you send me someone from the Blockchain Association, maybe I have a different response than if someone comes from the Bipartisan Policy Center or the American Conference of Mayors. You know what I mean? Like in DC, you can imagine DC as like a giant high school cafeteria. It's like a pretty reasonable, comparable. So let's say you had the table of jocks. Who do you send to the jocks to like get them to do something? Like you don't send their arch enemy. You send the person the jocks like. So what I just described is a billion-dollar industry in DC. It's like sending someone to the table that they like. Anyway, I can tell you some DC war stories if you want. Is that fun?
Go for it.
No. So someone tried to do a study on the return on investment on lobbying, and guess what number they came back with? 1,700% return. It's like a 17x return. So when firms saw this, they were like, "Oh, well, we should spend more on lobbying." So it like ratchets it up. So you have this giant industry now built around access and being able to send someone that someone likes to particular offices and places. So who do they like? People that used to work in that office. Because the person who used to work in that office sometimes hired the people that are currently in the office. So imagine your old boss calling and being like, "Hey, can I have lunch with you?" Or are you going to be like, "No"? You'd be like, "Sure." So then you say yes, and then the person shows up and is like, "Have I got a important thing to talk to you about?" So what I just described, believe it or not, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Good times in the U.S. of A. Good times.
So switching gears a little bit, regulation is definitely a hot topic in this space. Curious if you have any thoughts on like the direction things should go for DAOs in particular.
I'm hopeful that the regulations are an intelligent approach to balanced concerns. And as you can tell, I think from even this tone, I do think that we need regulation on a significant number of these tools. DAOs, it would depend upon what the DAO is doing. Like certain DAOs, I don't think are anything the government should be concerned about. If it was interfacing with something in the public sphere, then sure. But you want them to be regulations that actually clear the path for innovation and investment in building. One of the concerns right now is that a lot of people, including I'm sure some people in this room, are situating your operations overseas or your corporate entities overseas because it's better for compliance or tax or predictability or your investors prefer it. And that's a catastrophe for the US. You know what I mean? Like you can't have the folks who are going to be building this next generation of the internet like just avoiding the US. So if the US has an intelligent regulatory structure, like it's possible that it actually unleashes more innovation as opposed to suppressing it and making it more difficult. So that's our goal.
And for everyone in this room, like other than contributing to organizations like Lobby3, like do you think there's anything that we can do to move regulation forward in a more sensible direction?
I mean, there are always things that can be done. Unfortunately, one of the foundations of my current work is that public opinion and policy have no relationship anymore. I don't know if you all know that. There's no relationship. Princeton academics looked it up in 2014, and they found no relationship between what people want. Again, probably why people are so upset. So if you wanted to improve regulation, I genuinely think that investing in this layer that touches the policymakers and regulators is the most effective thing you could do. But the other effective thing that could be done that's much more aligned with what you're doing anyway is just trying to create awesome products that touch people that right now are not really that highly exposed to Web3. And if those communities happen to look like marginalized communities or people that are on the outside looking in, like that's a win. If you're all doing that, then that would be phenomenal because those stories would end up eventually reaching the public eye, with the giant caveat being that what the public wants doesn't actually correspond to policy. One of the things that does correspond a little bit to policy, though, is whether the media is speaking favorably about something, because there are political figures who respond to the press. Like, they're afraid of doing something and then getting beaten up in the press about it. So right now, how would you evaluate the media's treatment of Web3? Pretty negative, I'd say. I think most people, like according to popular consciousness, what are the main use cases of Web3? Or the media? Bad stuff. I'll just summarize and say bad stuff.
Shadowy supercoders.
I could be specific, but I'll leave it there. So to the extent that you all can make good things happen, and then those good things actually reach a point where the press has to reckon with the fact that that you can build awesome things that help people and make the world more sustainable, or whatever the benefit is, then that's so I would put that on you more so than the other stuff. It's like just build awesome things that solve problems and improve people's lives, and then we'll try and shine a light on you and keep the regulators from doing anything too boneheaded, hopefully.
I think a lot of us in this room are building awesome things that can improve people's lives, and even might directly address problems that some regulations are created to address, right? But problem is, and I've heard you talk about this before, that the space is just so complex. There's so many different things going on. It's so hard for policymakers to just absorb all this information and understand what's going on and how it's actually benefiting people's lives. How do you think we change that? And what's a realistic timeline for getting to the point where politicians do understand the benefits of this technology?
I think that the time frame could be pretty short. And there is a guy that I had dinner with a number of weeks. I don't know if he cares that I said that, but Sam Bankman-Fried was the biggest Democratic donor last cycle, and the folks in D.C. respond to resources. You know what I mean? If you think they didn't notice that Sam was doing what he was doing, oh, they noticed. And so, if the folks who are building in this space want to try and make it more of a consideration for the folks in DC, that there are very, very direct ways to do so. I do love just the vision of just build awesome things and try and make the reality head in a certain direction and then figure the perception will catch up to the reality. I think, because you're right, I agree with you, Amir. There are people doing awesome things right here in this room, most of which will not be covered in the mainstream press. And so one thing that I will commit to you all from Lobby3 is that if you do awesome things, we'll try and get mainstream press to pay attention to you and then bring that to the folks who are regulating the space. That's one of our roles. Well, look at that. Maybe I'll even show up for that interview. They'll come, they'll be like, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll be behind it being this is the kind of thing that Web3 can do. And then I'll run off.
All right, so just a few days ago was the 14th anniversary of the inception of Bitcoin. Also, it's been about 6 years since starting 0x now, so it's been quite a while. And I think this industry has clearly accomplished a lot. We've proven a lot. There's trillions of dollars of value flowing through this technology every day. But in some other ways, it feels like we are just still so early. It's not mainstream. Regular people are not necessarily using this in their everyday lives, or still very technical. Got to jump through a lot of hoops to use this technology. With that in mind, I'm curious. What do you think are some of the largest opportunities and threats for the blockchain space as a whole over the next couple of years?
So some of you who are perceptive said hey, wasn't the subject of this supposed to be about new currencies and revitalizing communities, which I haven't talked a whole lot about. So so I'm going to drive to that as when you say the greatest opportunity, Amir. So one of the things that motivated my presidential campaign, and this will be some more straw polling, what percentage of Americans graduate from college? Go ahead and shout out what you think that number is. It's 35%. So 2/3 of this country are high school grads. And the 5 most common jobs in this country are, in order, clerical and administrative, retail, food service and food prep, trucking and transportation, and manufacturing. What percentage of Americans do one of those 5 jobs? 50. It's 49% in those 5 categories. So when you talk about the biggest opportunities and the biggest needs, is trying to find new ways to energize communities and make it so that people have touch points and interfaces with each other locally, ideally locally. And in my mind, one of the vital innovations that needs to help make this happen is new forms of currencies that spur different forms of exchange of value. Because right now, one of the pitches I make is that even now, someone who doesn't know anything about Web3 is already utilizing probably 4 or 5 different currencies in their day-to-day life, right? They're using cash, they're using credit cards, they have probably at least one of Venmo and PayPal. They have some points on one of their cards somewhere. They have the deli punch card where if they get the 10th sandwich, they get the 11th for free. So we need to introduce new ways for people to be able to meaningfully interact with each other in ways that will end up spurring the kind of vitality and entrepreneurship and artistry and creativity that we need. And in my mind, the more formats that value exchange takes, the better off we're going to be. Because right now there are a whole host of things that you do and then someone will pay you US dollars for. But there's a whole range of things that we want people to do that's not natural. You know what I mean? Like if I go help my neighbor, like look after their kids, they're probably not going to give me money because I'm an adult and I'd probably be insulted. Be like, you're giving me money to, like, you know what I mean? But if you volunteer in the community, it might be something similar. If you contribute some art, well, maybe art. But there are a whole host of things that, in my mind, we want to try and encourage people to do that the blockchain and Web3 and new currencies would be the ideal instrument. In terms of the threats, I think we're frankly living like the threats where you have a very hostile regulatory environment. You have people who are villainizing something they don't really understand, and then it all moves to other places. I think that's the downside case.
Is there speaking of threats, is there anything that you think the blockchain industry as a whole is not doing particularly well and maybe shouldn't focus as much on?
I think we still are at a point, to your earlier assertion or observation, we're still relatively early days in terms of the products and the use cases that the average American who doesn't need to know anything about the underlying backbone of the blockchain or whatnot says oh, this is awesome. This makes my life better. I can do things I couldn't do before. When you reach that point, then you're on your way. And can I see some of those things materializing? Oh yeah, I can. And one of the things that I see as a massive opportunity, just of many, is this sense of owning your own data, because that's something that the average American can understand. They might not understand blockchain, but if you say to them, look, would you like to own your own data? Would you like to make it so that Zuckerberg doesn't control everything? You want to be able to take it with you. You want to be able to turn it off. You want to be able to make money on it. The average American can understand that. And if you can get them to a point where they're signing up in very large numbers for, let's say, that kind of data collective that uses the blockchain, but they don't need, this is my challenge in many ways. You have to try and make it relevant for someone who does not understand and will never understand blockchain or the underlying technology, you know what I mean? You just need to do something that they're excited about independent of the underlying technology.
Yeah, speaking of that, there's actually a good recent example. Reddit launched these NFTs. Are you familiar?
No, I actually have an observation on this front. Even the word blockchain, some people find intimidating. Some people find daunting. And I know this in part because we had an event in Houston, and we used blockchain in the name, and then we saw what people responded to it, and a lot of people were I don't understand enough to show up. I'm going to be embarrassed, that sort of thing. And so we changed the name to something more general, and then more people signed up and showed up. So I thought there was a lesson there. It's you want to try and make it welcoming and accessible, and that can include even calling it something else.
Yeah, I mean that's actually exactly what Reddit did. So
tell me more.
They launched these NFTs. You can use them as your profile picture. I think a lot of communities on Reddit have been pretty anti-blockchain or anti-NFTs. But what Reddit did is they just called them digital collectibles. No mention of blockchain anywhere, and they just got super, super popular. And there are people posting on Reddit these aren't NFTs, these are digital collectibles. Interesting to watch it play out, but yeah, definitely a lesson to be learned there.
It's one reason why I called universal basic income the freedom dividend in my presidential campaign, because we tested it, and conservatives just liked it better with the word freedom in it. You know, you just got to go to where the people are. Instead of saying like, hey, I'm going to name it something that maybe some of you find kind of clubby or insular.
All right, 10 years from now, let's say we don't mess it up. Let's say regulation doesn't take us, in the wrong direction. It's sensible regulation. What do you think like the world could look like if blockchain adoption really takes off? And where do you see the government fitting into this?
This is one reason I do what I do, everyone, is that you can see a path to some very, very optimistic, awesome scenarios for even the biggest problems that we have. I mean, you can imagine a not so distant future where people are voting on their smartphones and they have intelligent proxies and you have government officials who are genuinely accountable and representative. That could happen pretty quickly. There's a scenario when it happens in the next 2 or 6 years. You can have a world where we own our own data and interact with each other and don't have any fear of being manipulated or egged on or fed misinformation or whatever the heck we don't want to have happen. And you have these incredible new firms that are being built up that are genuinely in our corner. Maybe that there are ownership or governance structures that are built on these tools. That's very realistic. It's a real possibility that X years from now, that small town in America will have new ways of exchanging value with each other based upon their own time and philanthropy in like a small scale or creativity where they just do something nice for their community and they get this currency and they can use it to meet their needs and help reward others. All of these things are possible. Now, are they the most likely scenario in each of these cases? I'll leave it to you to evaluate what you think the most likely scenarios are. You can see very clearly that these are within our reach. One of the reasons I was so motivated in running for president, we have a $22 trillion economy, about 300 million people, so it's like a GDP of let's call it 72,000 a head, which has gone up. It's like 24 trillion now. 75,000 a head is enough to eliminate poverty if you actually felt like it. Even in the COVID response, we put out $4 or $5 trillion. You know how much that is per head? It's like $16,000 a head. It was enough to do what I'd said to do, for everyone in the country. Which, by the way, would probably be a lot happier circumstance than the one we find ourselves in now, where the vast majority of that money got plowed into various pipes and corporate. So there is this vision of abundance and possibility that is warring with the scarcity mindset. Now, I will say to you all objectively, I think the scarcity mindset's winning. People are in a shitty mood, generally speaking. There's an orneriness, a guardedness, a skepticism. It's even when you're trying to do something good, they'll be like, what's the catch? What's the catch? Because they're kind of used to getting kicked by the people who have it over them. They reached out to people, so there is an incredible line of opportunities in these spaces, and I know many of us are working on them. We just got to work really, really hard and fast. We just got to try and make these things happen, because one of the quotes I love is from a guy named Buckminster Fuller, who's an inventor, but he said that the race between utopia and dystopia will be neck and neck until the very last second. I think he's right. You know what I mean? There's some bad things coming down the pike, but there's some good things too. We just got to speed them up.
So in this future vision, if we do execute correctly, things do really take off. Where do you see the government's place in that world? Relative to blockchain technology.
So what's really funny is I obviously am pretty deep into the workings of government for a civilian for sure. I do employ lobbyists. We have things. I can call a dozen senators or governors. Still, even though I'm doing my own thing, they all know They all know me and the rest of it. And my feeling is that our government has been on a tape delay of around 25 years behind the rest of us. And there's some structural reasons for that. I mean, I called out the average senator, 64. Like Nancy Pelosi's 81, Steny Hoyer's 80, Chuck Schumer's like 72 or 73. These are people that don't really need to understand technology to have their jobs or do their jobs. So the folks who are going to understand technology natively are 20 years away from taking power. So in many ways, what we have to do is like build the future as quickly as possible, and then hope that by the time government actually turns its attention to it, like that they're not being guided by entrenched actors who want to kill whatever is being built. I mean, that is the order of things. Now, I am optimistic that enough people now are involved with Web3 that it's going to have a big place in the future. But some of the things I just described, or one of the things that some of you might be working on, is like next generation financial services. There are like massive financial actors who may or may not love that vision of the future. I mean, if you had blockchain, like massive law firms might be less important. And believe it or not, massive law firms actually have a pretty good presence on Capitol Hill. So the goal is to make it that the future becomes indisputable. So even for someone who interacts very heavily with government, I don't have any illusions. Like the goal, obviously, is that the government actually spurs and catalyzes innovation, which it has at various points in the past. I mean, it did invest in the internet. It did kick off some things. But in many ways, we should just try and get them to a point where they're doing this physician principle of trying to do no harm. You know what I mean?
Cheers to that. Awesome. Well, yeah, it seems you're super aligned with the Web3 space. We have a small surprise for you. Heard that you are really into basketball.
Oh my gosh, what is this? Is this a Studley jersey with my name on it? Nothing would make me happier. Look at this.
Thank you for being a part of Team Web3.
Yeah, I'll take it. Look at this. Web3. So fun. I love it. Well, thank you, Amir.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. Any parting words?
Let's build a future, people. It's not going to build itself, and we don't have unlimited time. Thank you all so much.